Hello and welcome back. This is our video on how the SEC defines what a registered investment advisor is in the United States. Again, my name is Michael Rasmussen. Welcome back to my channel. Last week, this week in RIA compliance. This is where we discuss certain compliance and legal topics that are relevant to the registered investment advisors out there. So thank you for joining us. Please do hit the subscribe button if this content is relevant to you. So let's jump in. How does the SEC define a registered investment advisor in the United States? So as a starting point, we're looking at the Investment Advisors Act of 1940 and specifically Section 202 of that, where we get a bunch of definitions. So I'm going to go ahead and read you the definition of what an investment advisor is under the Advisors Act. Any person who, for compensation, engages in the business of advising others, either directly or indirectly, or through publications or writings, as to the value of securities or as to the advisability of investing in, purchasing, or selling securities, or who, for compensation and as part of a regular business, issues or promulgates analysis or reports concerning securities. So that was kind of a mouthful, and it is a very long, kind of awkward definition. But generally speaking, we're talking about three different elements. The first element is the entity or person must be engaged in the business of providing advice or of issuing analysis or reports concerning securities. The second element is the advice, analysis, or report must be with respect to the value of securities. And then third, the advice, analysis, or report must be provided in return for compensation. So we have engaged in the business of, relating to securities, and for compensation. Those are kind of our three elements under the Advisors Act of what an investment advisor does. So we're going to go through each one of those elements one by one, and you'll quickly realize that they're not as straightforward as they might seem at first. But before we get into those, why is this kind of important? The idea of whether or not you're an investment advisor comes along with fairly heavy regulatory scrutiny of what investment advisors are doing. This is both at the SEC level, and then at the state level, you can have regulators looking at you from all different angles if you meet this definition of an investment advisor. So element one, engaged in the business of. So we're looking again at, are you engaged in the business of providing advice on securities for compensation? So what does it mean to be engaged in the business of? The SEC looks at a number of factors when they're trying to make a determination whether someone or an entity is engaged in this type of business, in the investment advisor business. So let's take a look at some of these. Whether the person holds himself out as an investment advisor. So not surprisingly, if you have a sign attached to the front of your office door that says Joe Smith or Mary Smith, investment advisor, you are probably holding yourself out as an investment advisor. The compensation element kind of comes into here to play as well. So are you compensated for providing services that you've laid out to clients that are related, again, to the investment advisor? The SEC will say, well, that's a little redundant. And that, again, shows that you're holding yourself out as an investment advisor. Then they will look at, assuming you don't meet some of those other elements, the frequency in which you are providing advice. So did you just do this as a one-off thing and you're never going to do it again? Or are you doing it daily, weekly, monthly? They'll look at that sort of frequency and the cadence in which you are providing the advice. It's a scale, of course. It's a piece of evidence that the SEC will use to say, yes, you are an investment advisor. Therefore, you need to be registered. And if you weren't registered, well, there's going to be some ramifications for that. So that's, again, element one, engaged in the business of. So element two is advising others about securities, or the value of securities, and whether or not it's advisable to purchase or sell securities. So obviously the key word there is securities. What a security is can be a very complex conversation. In the United States, we look at the Securities Act of 1933 for a definition of what a security is. Unfortunately, the Investment Advisors Act 1933 doesn't give us a definition. Rather, it gives us a list of things that are typically considered to be securities. So you'll have your obvious suspects like stocks, bonds, those types of things are listed there. Those are securities. Where it gets a little bit more gray is this idea of an investment contract. One of those things listed again in the Securities Act of 1933 as a security is an investment contract. And when the rule first came out, nobody knew what an investment contract was necessarily. So the United States Supreme Court ultimately had to make a determination of what an investment contract is. And a lot of you working in the crypto space right now will be very familiar with what is called the Howey test. The Howey test is a Supreme Court case that came out and it laid out certain criteria. And if you met that criteria, then you were considered to be dealing with a security, and therefore you fell under the Securities Act of 1933. And we would use that same test here in the prodigy of that test to make a determination whether we're talking about security, if there was any sort of gray areas to whether or not what you were discussing was or was not a security. So again, are we in the business? That's element one. Are we talking about a security? Are we talking about stocks, bonds? 99% of the time we are. Or do we meet that definition of a security vis-a-vis looking at that investment contract definition and the case law that surrounds it? So element three is compensation. This one usually is the most straightforward. However, of course, there can be a bit of a gray area here when we're talking about things like referral programs. So is compensation me giving advice to somebody and then getting a referral out of it, or giving a referral out of it and not cash, for example? Anything non-cash always seems to create a bit of a question mark in people's minds. It really shouldn't. It's cash or cash equivalents, or it can be non-cash, like a referral. So believe it or not, I once had a client ask me, well, can I just pay somebody by giving them a car and I won't have to meet the definition of an investment advisor? Or excuse me, can I be compensated by receiving a car and I won't meet the definition because that's not compensation? That's not at all the games that you want to be playing with the SEC, obviously, or any other regulator. So again, go back, take a look at the definition. If you meet all three of those elements in the business, advising on securities for compensation, you are almost certainly an investment advisor. So again, what does it mean if you meet that definition? Well, if you're an investment advisor in the United States, if you met that definition, you likely have to be registered as an investment advisor. And the registration process is something we talk about quite a bit on this channel. So you can go to another one of our posts to get a deeper dive into that. But there's really a process, and there's a lot of documentation and materials that need to be put together for the registration process. Something, of course, I can work with you. My law firm works with a lot of clients in this area. That's kind of what we focus on. But that's the initial first step. Have you been operating as an investment advisor without being registered? If you have, that's a violation of the Advisors Act, and there can be ramifications for that. So what are some of those ramifications? One is you may have to return the compensation that you received. So you may have given somebody this great advice, received some compensation for that, not been registered, and the SEC could come in and say, you failed to register appropriately, you need to return that compensation. In addition, those regulators may fine you. They could bar you from the industry. They could put either temporarily or permanently restrict your ability to act as an investment advisor, and so on and so forth. Don't get into this mess. Work with somebody who really understands this area. Contact us, contact another attorney, contact a compliance professional in this space who really knows what they're talking about. This isn't the sort of area that you want to guess, am I an investment advisor? Am I not an investment advisor? And generally speaking, we always suggest that clients, lean on the side of caution. You'd much rather be registered as an investment advisor and take care of all of those requirements than fail to register as an investment advisor and have the regulators come down on you for that. And it's not just the SEC. Again, you can have state regulators knocking at your door and saying, are you providing investment advisor services without being registered as an investment advisor? So you could be in violation of both federal laws and state laws. So thank you for watching. I hope this was informative. I hope these topics are relevant to you. If you do like the content that we're providing, please do hit the subscribe button, and we hope to see you again in the next video.